And Kunthep Chai, today is the third day of the House debate on financial loan to relieve COVID-19. Yeah, so that the issue coming up for the House debate. Who should take credit for success in containing COVID-19?
So tonight we will try to summarize all the major points that have been raised and debated in the 3 days of a House session on the 3 royal decrees on loans and on rescue package in the face of the coronavirus. The most important and probably the most interesting question is who should take credit for Thailand's success in containing the coronavirus. And this has been a hot topic of debate in the House for the past 3 days. Of course, I mean, government MPs and the opposition have totally different opposing views on who should be credited for the success. So if you ask the government MPs, I mean, have been insisting that because of the leadership of the government, especially under Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, Thailand has been able to win the battle against the coronavirus. But the opposition think otherwise. They believe that the credits should go to the medical personnel and members of the public who have been making sacrifices and have been working very hard to cooperate with the government in fighting the disease. So it's interesting to notice that every time a government MP takes a podium in the session, he or she would start by saying that we want to thank the Prime Minister for his leadership that has led Thailand to success in fighting the coronavirus. But if the opposition MPs take the podium, he or she would start by saying that we want to thank medical personnel and members of the public for their contribution in fighting the coronavirus. And they even, and most of them would also add something like this, that with or without the government, these medical personnel would have been able to really wrestle with the situation anyway. So very clear that the opposition doesn't want to give any credit to the government at all for the country's success in containing the virus.
But they must presume that it's their job to try to discredit the government and leadership of the government. But to see in the overall picture, government has to be working in tandem with public health official to be at this point. But of course, it would be quite beyond imagination for opposition camp to give credit to the government.
It's their job to find faults with the government. And then the next question is that is the cure worse than the disease? I think that's another question that the opposition has been raising in the 3 days of debate. The opposition believes that the government fails miserably in the initial stage of the pandemic. There were confusions, there were a lot of back and forth, passing of the bucks between the different government agencies on why that Thailand wasn't able to really stop the spreading of the virus. But the government tried to make up for the failure in dealing with the pandemic in the initial stage with draconian shutdown measures that they believe are hurting the economy and the people's livelihoods. And the draconian shutdown measures include the curfews and restrictions on travel and everything else that limits the people, business, and social activities. And the opposition MPs try to point out that these are the real cause of the problems the country is facing. It's not the pandemic anymore. It's the way that the government handles the situation, which is the problem.
Of course, it's true to a certain extent because it's up to government management decision in terms of making decision when and how to ease restriction. Because as long as all the business activities are kept in check or being closed, it's very hard to resume all the business activities.
And of course, the opposition MPs who take the podium, try to echo what they claim to be their constituents' plight and sufferings from the strict shutdown measures. And they certainly want to see all these measures lifted as soon as possible. And then the next question is about the use or the merits of the state of emergency. The opposition believes that the state of emergency has been used not as a tool against the virus, but more as a political tool to silence or to stifle political dissent. So that's certainly, I mean, this view is in contrast to what the government thinks. Mm-hmm. The government wants to show that one of the reasons for the success of the fight against the coronavirus is because of the state of emergency that limits people movement, limit the hours of the people that can be on the streets under curfew. So the government wants people to believe that it is because of the state of emergency. That's why the government has been successful in containing the spread of the virus. But the opposition tried to point out that certain government agencies have been using the state of emergency to curtail critics of the government's activities. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For example, there are students, there are some activists who want to go on the streets and to make some noises and to cry out against some of the government's measures in dealing with the situation. Yeah. But they could not do that simply because under the state of emergency, this kind of gatherings is not permitted.
The government must have heard of this criticism, of course, otherwise the Prime Minister wouldn't have said that today he will reconsider ending state of emergency at the end of the 4th phase, and it will be replaced by other law that can be applied instead of state of emergency. But overall, it's been maintained for quite a certain period of time.
Yeah. And this argument we have been hearing the past 3 days from the opposition, that is the stimulus spending package proposed by the government lacks specifics. Mm-hmm. And all the projects that are put under this program are just a jumble of different projects, simply to give a semblance that the government knows what it is doing. And more importantly, the opposition believes that the government doesn't give any assurance of the existence of effective mechanisms that will ensure transparency and accountability in implementing these projects, which will be based on the spending of trillions of baht, because the government under one of the royal decrees is entitled to borrow as much as 1 trillion baht to help with the healthcare and to help with the recovery of the economy.
Yes, this point is very crucial because otherwise people do not know up until now the exact details how the government is going to spend 1 trillion baht in order to help relieve the economic situation.
That's right. Okay.
So that's the detail that the government needs to outline and tell the public in more details in the future.
So the debate in the House has been revolving around these 4 points that we just mentioned. I mean, the government's failure in dealing with the pandemic in the initial stage, the use of draconian measures that are hurting the economy, and then the abuse of the state of emergency that are hurting the country's image and are stifling the political dissent views. And then, of course, the lack of mechanisms to ensure transparency and accountability in implementing these recovery projects. And of course, 2 more days to go, tomorrow and on Sunday. So, but so far, we noticed that the speakers from the opposition bloc have not diverted from these 4 main points.
Yeah, so we shall listen more for 2 more days in the House of the House debate, how things will play out at the end, and the vote itself would be very interesting, Kun Thepchai.
But it's a foregone conclusion that the government will have these 3 degrees passed
of course.
Without much trouble,
yes.
because it controls a very convincing majority in the House now.
Yes.
We remember that there have been defections of MPs from some opposition parties, right? So from a government with a slim majority at the beginning, the Prayut coalition now is in strong command of a very convincing majority in the parliament.
Yeah, they can sell through all the votes because they have majority vote in the parliament.